Here is a question that sounds like a compliment but is actually a diagnosis. What is the most complex object in the known universe? The answer, according to neuroscientists, is the human brain. 3 pounds of tissue containing roughly 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others, forming a network of somewhere between 100 trillion and 1,000 trillion connections. The most intricate structure we have ever discovered anywhere in existence. And here's the part nobody says out loud. That extraordinary brain, the very thing you are using right now to process these words, was built by evolution to solve one specific category of problem. Surviving on the African savanna a few 100,000 years ago, not understanding mathematics, not doing philosophy, not comprehending the nature of consciousness, definitely not understanding an intelligence that evolved on a completely different world, under completely different pressures, for billions of years longer than we have existed. And the terrifying implication of that fact is this: when we try to imagine alien intelligence, we are not actually imagining anything alien at all. We are just imagining ourselves, and we cannot stop doing it, not because we are not trying hard enough, because our brain is physically, structurally, biologically incapable of doing anything else. In February of 2026, a researcher at the California Institute of Technology named S.G. Georgevsky published a paper that almost nobody outside of academic circles noticed. Its title was Imagining the Alien, Human Projections and Cognitive Limitations, and what it argued, in careful scientific language backed by decades of cognitive research, is something that should fundamentally change how humanity thinks about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Georgevsky pointed out that virtually every attempt humans have ever made to imagine what alien intelligence might be like, across all of human history, in science, in religion, in art, in science fiction, has done the same thing. It has taken human characteristics, human motivations, human body plans, human social structures, and projected them outward. We imagine aliens that want things, that communicate, that have hierarchies and goals and conflicts, that feel curiosity or aggression or loneliness. We imagine them as essentially human, but with different biology or different technology. And the reason we keep doing this, the reason we seemingly cannot imagine anything genuinely different, is not a failure of creativity. It is a feature of how brains work, specifically, how human brains work. And it is a feature we cannot think our way out of, because the very thinking we would use to escape it is itself the problem. To understand why, you need to understand something about how the human brain constructs reality. Your brain does not experience the world directly. It receives raw signals, electrical impulses from your eyes, your ears, your skin, and it builds a model, a representation of reality that is shaped by the particular sensors you have, the particular processing architecture evolution gave you, and the particular experiences you have accumulated through your specific life. You do not see the world. You see a version of the world that your brain is capable of constructing from the tools it was given, and those tools were selected by millions of years of evolution on one particular planet, with one particular gravity, one particular atmosphere, one particular spectrum of light from one particular type of star, surrounded by organisms that share your basic biochemistry and your basic survival pressures. This idea has a name in biology, though most people outside of cognitive science have never heard it. It was introduced by a biologist named Jacob von Uexküll in 1909, and the word he used was Umwelt. It means, roughly, the self-centered universe, the specific slice of reality that a given organism is capable of perceiving and processing. A tick, von Uexküll pointed out, experiences the world as essentially two things: the warmth of a mammalian body and the smell of mammalian blood, that is its entire universe, not because the rest of reality does not exist, but because those are the only signals its sensory system is built to detect and respond to. A bat experiences the world as a landscape of echoes, three-dimensional shapes built from the reflection of sound waves, in frequencies and resolutions that no human ear can process. A dog navigates through a universe of chemical information so rich and layered that researchers estimate it is roughly 100,000 times more detailed than anything a human nose can register. Each of these creatures lives inside a different Umwelt. Each one experiences a different version of the same physical reality. None of them is more correct than the others. They are all simply built for different things. Now ask the question that this concept makes inevitable. What is the human Umwelt? We see light in a narrow band between roughly 380 and 700 nanometers. We hear sounds between roughly 20 and 20,000 hertz. We feel gravity at Earth's specific pole. We process social information through a set of emotional and cognitive systems that evolve specifically to navigate small groups of roughly 150 individuals. We think in language, which is a system that evolved to communicate between members of the same species with roughly the same sensory equipment and roughly the same cognitive architecture. Our entire experience of reality, everything we have ever felt, thought, imagined, or understood, is bounded by these parameters. And we cannot step outside them. We cannot decide to perceive the world differently. We cannot simply choose to develop a new cognitive architecture because we want to understand something our current one cannot process. You can know intellectually that your Umwelt is limited, but but you cannot experience anything outside it. The moment you try to imagine something beyond human cognition, you are still using human cognition to do the imagining, and everything that emerges from that process will carry its fingerprints. This is why a very specific and very well-documented cognitive bias keeps appearing every single time humans try to think about alien intelligence. The bias is called anthropomorphism, and it is not a quirk of uneducated thinking. It runs all the way through some of the most sophisticated scientific attempts to conceptualize extraterrestrial life. In 1940, psychologists Fritz Heider and Marianne Simmel conducted an experiment that is still discussed in cognitive science today. They showed participants a short film of simple geometric shapes, triangles and circles, moving around a screen. The movements were random, the shapes were meaningless, and yet virtually every person who watched the film immediately began describing what was happening in terms of intentions, motivations, and relationships. The big triangle was aggressive. The small circle was scared. The shapes were chasing each other, protecting each other, trying to escape. Nobody was telling them to do this. Nobody suggested it. The human brain did it automatically, instantly, and with a certainty that felt completely natural. Because attributing intention and mental states to things that move is something the human brain does reflexively, before conscious thought has a chance to intervene. The researchers who study this call it hyperactive agency detection. Evolution built human brains to be exquisitely sensitive to the possibility that something in the environment might have intentions, because missing a predator is far more costly than falsely assuming a rustling bush is dangerous. The result is a brain that sees minds everywhere, in faces, in clouds, in patterns and random noise, in the behavior of simple shapes on a screen. And when that same brain tries to imagine alien intelligence, the exact same mechanism kicks in. We automatically assume the alien wants something, that it communicates through signals we can interpret, that it has goals we can understand, that it experiences something we might recognize as emotion or motivation or consciousness. We cannot help it. The neural machinery that generates these assumptions is not under conscious control. It runs before we are aware it is running, and by the time we sit down to consciously imagine what alien intelligence might be like, anthropomorphism has already shaped the question. But here is where this gets even more specific and even more interesting, because there is a measurable, physical limit to what human cognition can process that has nothing to do with imagination or bias. It is a hardware limit. Human neurons transmit signals at a maximum speed of roughly 120 meters per second. This is the fundamental physical rate at which information moves through your brain. It governs how fast you can think, how quickly you can process sensory input, how rapidly your brain can update its model of reality. Now consider what researchers have noted about the trajectory of intelligence beyond biology. Processing speeds in silicon-based systems already operate at speeds approaching the speed of light, which is approximately 300 million meters per second. The gap between the speed of human thought and the speed at which silicon processes information is not a factor of 2 or 10, it is a factor of millions. And that is today, with technology in its infancy, an intelligence that has been developing for 1 billion years, that has had 1 billion years to optimize its own architecture, that has left behind biological constraints entirely, might process information at rates and in dimensions that human cognition cannot represent. Not that we would find it hard to keep up, not that we would need to think more carefully, literally cannot represent. The same way a two-dimensional surface cannot contain a three-dimensional object. A cognitive architecture with specific physical limits cannot model a system whose operations exceed those limits by orders of magnitude. You could know that such a system exists. You could measure some of its outputs, but understanding it, in the way you understand a human conversation, or a mathematical proof, or a piece of music, would be physically impossible. Not difficult, impossible, because understanding requires building an internal model, and the internal model can only be as complex as the architecture building it allows. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein made an observation that has haunted this field ever since. He said that the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. He was pointing at something more fundamental than vocabulary. He was pointing at the fact that language, which is the structure through which human beings think and conceptualize, is itself a product of human cognition and human experience. It can only contain what human minds have been able to form, and anything that lies outside what human minds can form has no representation inside the structure of language, which means it has no representation in human thought at all. When we try to describe alien intelligence, we reach for the words and concepts we have: consciousness, communication, goal, desire, intelligence itself. And every one of those words carries the shape of the mind that made it. We are trying to describe something that may have none of those properties, using a tool that can only produce descriptions containing all of them. Now here is the part that should make you genuinely curious rather than simply resigned, because there is a crack in this wall, something that Georgevsky himself pointed to in his 2026 paper, and that researchers across cognitive science and astrobiology are beginning to take seriously. When humans built artificial intelligence, something unexpected happened. We built a system that thinks, in some sense, without using human cognitive architecture, not because we planned it that way, because the training processes that shaped modern AI systems selected for capabilities, rather than for human-like reasoning, and the result is something that occasionally produces outputs that human beings cannot fully explain, that arrives at solutions through pathways that human introspection cannot follow, that generates patterns and associations that no individual human would have generated the same way. In other words, we accidentally created something that operates slightly outside our Umwelt, not alien in any deep sense, but different in ways that are already beginning to give researchers new frameworks for thinking about what intelligence could look like, when it is not constrained by human evolutionary history. If that is what a few decades of AI development can produce, imagine what billions of years of development might produce. Not something we can understand, not yet, but perhaps something that AI systems, themselves evolving beyond their original constraints, might eventually be able to begin translating into terms that some edge of human cognition can reach. Not full understanding, a signal, a direction, a crack in the wall of the Umwelt, just wide enough for a glimpse of what lies beyond it. So here is the question this entire conversation leaves you with, and it is a genuine one, not a rhetorical one. Is the limitation of the human brain when it comes to understanding alien intelligence a permanent ceiling, or is it simply the ceiling of the human brain as it exists right now? In this moment, before we understand our own cognition well enough to extend it, the universe has been running intelligence experiments for 13 billion years. We are one of the newest ones, and everything we think we know about what intelligence is, what it can be, what it can understand, is based entirely on a sample size of 1. The most complex object in the known universe is sitting inside your skull, and it is just barely, tentatively, beginning to realize the shape of its own limits, which means the most interesting question in science right now is not what alien intelligence looks like,